I want to share with you today has come not only from myself, but builds on some work from our area in the School of Human Movement and Nutrition Sciences at UQ. Some of you may know of Doone McDonald, here she is. Some may know Richard Tinning over there. And Doone in particular was the lead writer for the Australian Curriculum Health and Physical Education. And I had some opportunities to work with her in that I want to share with you today. Why should you listen to me today is probably useful. I was a teacher in health and physical education in Queensland for 15 years and absolutely loved the job. I will confess at the start, I am biased. I believe teachers are the best thing in the world, the most important job, and I think phys ed teachers are the smartest of the bunch. So, having declared my biases, I often say to my students at university, yep, people have told you, so you're doing teaching, you're not going to be a rocket science specialist or a neuroscience specialist. And I always say to them, you turn around and say, we health and physical education teachers every single day get to play with the minds and the bodies of the future. How much power's that? Either for good or for evil. So I think it's a fundamentally important profession, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here to share some of that work with you. On the back of some serious child sexual abuse cases that I experienced at schools, I went back to university to study and to look at the role of health and physical education teachers in the H of HPE, in the health work that teachers are increasingly doing, and to look at some of the boundaries around that work. So that is my area of specialty. I'm pleased to be in Asia as well because I'm an ISET board member. That's the International Research in Physical Education and Teacher Education community, and I'm keen for us to start having better connections with Asia. So it's a great honour to be here. And finally, one of the reasons that I want to share some work with you today is on the back of my role as the advisor, critical friend, and also lead academic of the national curriculum and the new senior health and senior PE courses at Queensland. So on the back of that portfolio, I hope that I have suitably given you my absolute CV for your contribution to listening to me over the next half hour. I want to start. I was in Korea last week, and I was saddened to hear of the suicide of Sully. Some of you may know about the K-pop phenomena and also about Sully and her suicide. There's been a few K-pop members who have committed suicide, and it has provided some really strong commentary, both at the political and at the popular level. And the commentary has really questioned the notion of bullying and social media, and of course, how particularly young men are bullying young women, of which the K-pop phenomena is kind of the end extreme. The question is, do we have a role in this? Is it the job of health and physical education to fix this? Same thing's happened in Australia. I was surprised, or not surprised perhaps, that we had a summer of a lot of drownings in Australia. And by the end of the summer, there was a huge push for health and physical education to fix swimming and drowning. So much so that a member of the Australian journalist fraternity rang me to put me on the spot and actually was quite aggressive with me on the other end of the phone and said, what is wrong with you with the Australian curriculum? Why are you not focusing on saving and making sure that every child can swim 50 metres in Australia safely? We actually had a really robust conversation for an hour. These are just two examples of some of the challenges that we face in the work that we do. I want to build on what Ash has said this morning and what I anticipate will be coming in the keynote tomorrow. I know this is a consistent theme that we're approaching in terms of the challenges of facing health and physical education. But I want to try and do that with a little bit of a tweak. I want to start by addressing the smart people that are in the room with some theory. Now, theory has been, in many situations, and particularly conferences like this, a dirty word. Same for myself. We have prided ourselves on being the ones at the coalface who do the grunty practical work. And yet, I want to make the case that it is unless we understand the theory that is sitting at the beautiful front couple of pages of our curriculum documents, if we don't build crap detectors out of that theory, we will be beholden to people getting rid of us in the core curriculum. And I want to unpack that a little bit with some of the latest theoretical developments around health and physical education that's happening across the globe. The theory that I want to look at will be a strong strengths-based approach, and I want to look at how we can use that to think through what's going on in health and physical education, and perhaps provocatively ask the question, is our subject healthy? Not, does it produce health, but is it healthy itself? And building on and taking the leaf out of ash this morning, I want to first look at some of the challenges that are facing us and perhaps some of the difficult story, and follow up with some of the ways in which I think we are one of the most healthy subjects, and we have the potential to be one of the most important subjects in the school curriculum. So that's actually going to require me, if I ask the question, how healthy is health and physical education, to think about, well, what do we mean by the word health? Increasingly, health is being put in the position as the primary reason and motivator behind what we do in sport, what we do in health and physical education, and in fact, health and creating well-being is being emphasised in schools more broadly. Many of you in international schools, and I want to say thank you to my colleagues at the Australian International School in Singapore for giving me this insight, have health nurses, you have a whole health corner that support your students. So I want to bring this down to two ways of thinking about health, and I want to call them health lenses, and then I want to put those health lenses onto our subject. The first health lens is the one that many of us have as a default lens, the pathogenic health lens. According to the pathogenic health lens, there is something perfect called health. Always remember the edge of the stage. There's something called health that's perfect, and it's an absolute. When we have ill health or disease, there is a defect that has compromised that perfect state. Our job from a pathogenic perspective is to find those defects, to track them down, to find the pathogens, be they risk, be they bacteria, virus, toxic environments. It's an important part of the work that we do in health. It's reliant very much on discovering defects. Our task then is to identify them and either to repair or prevent defects. From a pathogenic lens perspective, our primary question is about how has ill health or disease been produced? Why are you why are you ill or sick? A complementary way of thinking that sits at the foundations of the Australian curriculum's notion of strengths-based approach, in addition to positive psychology and the beautiful work that is done with disability, is Antonovsky's Salutogenic model of health. Now, if nothing else, you'll be able to go away from this presentation with a new exciting big word, salutogenesis. Antonovsky was an epidemiology epidemiologist in the US, and he did a study in the 1970s to look at the impact of chronic health. Many of us take chronic health for granted these days, but it actually was discovered. And at the time, he worked out that at any point in time in the average week, average year, 84% of the American population appeared to be at risk of chronic health. He was a bit of a negative bloke, Antonovsky. Ironic that he should be attached to a strengths-based approach. But at the end, the question that he asked was, how the hell does anyone ever stay healthy? Well, here's the amazing thing, he thought. Given all the stresses and everything that we face in life, the mystery of life is not that anybody ever gets sick. The mystery of life is how are people healthy? He challenged people to explore as much as they could, not only the pathogens of what causes illness, but what are the beautiful things in life that sustain us, that help us flourish, that give us health. And he had two ways of reconceptualising this. His first way was to say there is no such thing as perfect health. It doesn't exist. We all move every day in a fluid way across a continuum between two poles that we never actually reach. At one pole is ease, and at the other pole is dis-ease. Think for yourself. How are you feeling today? If we looked across the dimensions of your health and well-being, and if you compare that back to when you arrived from a flight, or how you might be tomorrow. Health is such a fluid thing. And Antonovsky said, we need to be considering what are the things that push us, the stressors that push us towards disease or disease. And what are those things in life, the general resistance resources that help us to be able to flourish in life? The second thing that Antonovsky did was he challenged the typical analogy that's used for preventative health. Some of you might be aware of this, and I'm going to be doing the story as quickly as I can. Public health professionals and health promotion people learn this very early in their degrees. There was a man walking through a forest, always a man. Walking through the forest, comes to a village, and at the village, all he sees is the people running into the water, into the river, pull people out. Put the person there, pull them out. What are you doing? And they said, can't you see? We're rescuing the people from drowning in the river. And he stands and looks at them. And then somebody comes back and says, why don't you stop rescuing them, go up the river, find out why they're falling in the first place, and stop them falling in? This is considered to be the fundamental analogy of biophysical, public, and preventative health. Hospitals, doctors, biomedical rescue people from illness and sickness. Preventative health does its work in health promotion. Antonovsky said, bollocks. There is no such thing as falling into and out of the river of life. We are all in the river of life. The twin questions we need to ask ourselves is how well can we swim? And most importantly, how supportive is our river? Antonovsky even claimed that it is much easier to make the river more supportive or to move people to a more supportive river than it is to actually change people's behaviour and help them swim better. Now, you and I are front and centre in this role. If we bring these things together, what we see is a way of thinking about how our young people that we are working with are navigating their rivers of life. What are the resources they have access to? Personal resources, social resources, community resources. When we think about some of the stresses, and this is one of the little maps that we get students to do in senior health in Queensland now, we think through what are some of those stresses, but also what might be some of the general resistance resources in our lives that help us to swim. The family dog, for example, brings so much joy, love, exercise, fundamental citizenship understanding. No one thinks to do a health and physical education unit on the family dog. I think it'd be wonderful, particularly in the early years. Social media. Social media, is it a stressor or is it a resource? How can we tip it to be thinking of social media as a resource and to be exploring that through? In summary, if we do a salutogenic lens, apply that, we actually acknowledge the fluidity of human beings and health. And we look and know about the fact that there are personal, social and community resources that help people flourish in the river of life. So our job is a little bit different. Our job is to recognise these resources that provide us and help us flourish and help us live a good life. We want to build and augment young people's resources. And we, most importantly, want to engage young people in learning activities that give them a good Siri to navigate their rivers of healthy life. The pedagogies we use are just as important as the content. We want to tool them up. We want to give them challenges to solve problems so that they can build those resources. So if we then look at how healthy is health and physical education, I just want to draw to everybody's attention that there is a lot of research that sits behind this, and also I've done an article that summarises this work, and I'm happy to share that with anybody who would like to follow up with some reading. But let's get into it, and I want to because my dear colleague Ashley has done such a lovely job this morning about some of the toxins or pathogens that we might see around our subject area. But drawing on our own research, we did a lovely project where we GoPro'd teachers. We went out to see how much health work teachers do. We met them in the morning and we tracked them for the whole day. We also did a huge survey on teachers to find out what did they see as was important about their work if we started this whole broad spectrum of health work. What did they feel confident in? What did they enjoy? Teaching physical education and teaching health education across the spectrum, including health and physical education teachers, was put far down the list compared to pastoral care, communicating with parents, and doing other health work. In fact, the more we did the study, the more we found out that the core business of what teachers were there for, teaching health and physical education, seemed to be the least of the work that they were doing. So there's something going on there that may suggest a bit of a risk. The second thing is, we shouldn't be surprised about this. Health and physical education has been positioned as an intervention for many, many years. I call it the pathogen of interventionist thinking. If we go back to the 40s and 50s, we were fixing crooked kids. In the 70s, drug kids. More recently, fat kids. We're constantly being told we're fixing unruly children and disciplining them. And more recently, it's mental health that is the new one on the block. I would argue these are all short-term gain, and the gains are seductive. They are incredibly seductive, and I want to get to that in a minute. But they are, and they flag long-term pain for us. One of the reasons is because that approach positions us in a policy realm, not a curriculum realm. I've got no problems with making sure we drown-proof young people. I totally agree with it. But it is policy, not curriculum, if we're going to make sure that they're all inoculated and they can swim 50 metres. That is not education, that's policy. I'm yet to hear a mathematics subject area defend themselves and their subject so that they can counter the increasing debt generated by Visa card. I haven't heard too many geography teachers justify their position in the curriculum on the Department of Foreign Affairs figures on how many people get lost internationally. It's policy. And we need to find ways to shift and talk back to it. Why? Because our whole subject area is easily outsourced. If we tie ourselves to these things, like fixing fat kids, we're a whole gamut and range of products and services that are keen, that quite often sectors are also willing to bring into schools and replace the PE teachers. And they are increasingly sophisticated, and I'm not questioning how powerful and supportive and wonderful they are as resources. I do know this though, this equation is challenging for us. If we have increasing technology and edu businesses, we also have, I know from my own school, generating a whole workforce that are keen around exercise, sports sciences, exercise physiologists. And I know the combination has meant that at least 2 high-profile HPE teacher education programs across the globe have gone already. And finally, we need to think about the relevance to young people. And I think Ash has done a lovely job of talking to that. But there's a fantastic survey in Australia, the Mission Youth Australia survey, which looks at getting young people's voice on their thoughts on health and wellbeing. And it's so fascinating because it's so different from what the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare stats show. 8 out of 10 young people in Australia say they're living a good life. They're healthy. That's their self-reporting. How are we enhancing and building? I'm not saying there's no challenges at all. So, we can end up with a little bit of a tough sense of that through a diagnostic lens. Let's flip it and go for a strengths-based lens. Let's ask the question, what is it that we need to do to push a health and physical education towards the curriculum end and away from the policy? My argument would be that we need to overemphasise and acknowledge the enormous potential we have in the word education of health and physical education. Instead of a study for health, let's be more sophisticated in a study of health. One of the most exciting fields in the globe, across the globe. This is about thinking differently, asking different questions, and taking students on a journey of discovery and tying what we do to long-term goals and careers. In Australia, this approach has actually been expressed in the national curriculum. It is being challenged because, as I said, many people don't go back and read what are these fundamental pillars, the 5 pillars of the Australian curriculum. At the heart of this is the educative intent. When these 5 propositions first went out, everybody responded so positively, particularly teachers, to the notion of a strengths-based health and physical education. And we thought maybe that's the heart of it, but it's not. It's educative. And why am I saying that? And this is where the crap detectors come in. An educative health and physical education, first and foremost, will be driven by assessment of knowledge and skills. The minute, and I've had lots of people come and want me to endorse their programs in Australia, that behaviour or behavioural outcomes are mentioned as ways of evaluating, then it's not educative. If it's not reported in its fullness with a lovely assessment item, then it's not educative. I just want to briefly go through some of these, but if you want more about this, I'm trying to do a lot more in my actual workshop, which I did some today and I can do it tomorrow. We know something's strengths-based when it's focusing in on building young people's resources, when the pedagogy is about problem solving and finding new ways and new challenges to address. Health literacy is absolutely the total gift to our field. At a time when we know young people are accessing information on the internet in increasingly troubling ways, our field has an enormous potential to be able to give young people themselves crap detectors, to understand and to question places like CrossFit, messages about body image, health information that is available to them, consumer messages. And movement, of course, is fundamental. How we can actually get young people engaged in diverse ways of doing movement. We know, for example, that the Google Labs have 2 massive, big warehouses trying to find the algorithms for movement. Because they were laid down in the brain so early, they are the most complex to break. Movement is so fascinating and so wonderful, not just from the perspective of health and fitness and fixing disease. And finally, critical inquiry, the goggles. The goggles that young people can wear to look at their rivers of life, to look at enablers and barriers, and to look at vested interest and inequities and social injustice. My argument is for the Health and Physical Education Australia, and it may also be for your curriculum, that you have these key fundamental orientating elements that can push us towards the curriculum and away from policy emphasis. Overall, together though, there's some big messages. Instead of thinking of young people in terms of getting them fit and our health and physical education area and sport achievements, let's think of our field and the ways in which we have investigation and innovation. We are leading the world in science in our field. Let's get our young people, get lab coats on. I don't want them to put Fitbits on, I want them to take them apart. I want to investigate the science behind them. We can still put them on and embed that into their course. Our field is rich with STEM. Our field is also rich, and I know that you're doing lots and lots of work around this, but we should be leading the way in the Australian space around NAPLAN and testing in literacy and numeracy. Our field generates so much data. Game stats, etc. We can be really harnessing that and harnessing the digital potential of our field and getting young people to be the leaders in creating the new health apps and the new ways of helping other young people swim in the river of life. And there can be little question that our field shouldn't be leading the way in solving problems and exploring ways of doing social justice and equity. I've got a small example of that for tomorrow in my Can Real Jocks Dance workshop. But we have potential to really be able to harness this with some big topics that are going on in our field. But most importantly, I would argue we need to become sophisticated in the way we assess and the way we share with our school leaders what our assessment is all about. This became really, really evident over the time of the health and physical education reform in Australia. People forget HPE was left off the core curriculum for 5 years. It wasn't going to be in the national curriculum. Queensland nearly lost senior physical education as an examinable subject because our understanding of the assessment troubled the whole ways in which the subject could move forward. So what I'm arguing for from a pathogenic perspective, what might this look like in life, in units of work? In oral health, from a pathogenic perspective, we look at gum disease, we might look at how to brush teeth and do all those behaviours. From a salutogenic perspective, as I shared today with my group, healthy selfies. Start with that. Why are smiles valuable? Or do mouth lab and explore food and how food goes into our mouths. What does it mean when we put food? How can we explore and understand and look after our mouths and really enjoy the taste of food? Fitness principles. Instead of testing young people in the fitness principles, why don't we get them to do scientific experiments around fitness principles? To actually be asking questions and to investigate their personal and team and get them to be exercise physiologists and to understand the work. They're subtle, nuanced modifications. And finally, food and nutrition. Instead of the food plate, let's look at the cultural diversity. Let's get young people devising a picnic that brings in all the food, and then you can still do, is that food? How does that food do the dietary guidelines and meet them? So in conclusion, a healthy health and physical education, what I'd like to share with you is an educative one. Builds teachers who have the capacity to advocate for their educative HPE and resist the seduction of interventionist thinking. I know when we need it the most and we struggle to get in the core curriculum, we rely on some really old ways of thinking, as Ash pointed out this morning, our gods. But I would like us to push that further. From a strengths-based perspective, what are the resources that are deeply embedded in our field and in the beautiful work that you do? How can we harness those? And in so doing, move and ground the work that is our beautiful subject area in the core business of schools and, in fact, as leaders of the school in these fields. I love this quote. Don't ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, but what problems do they want to solve? This changes the conversation from who do I want to work for to what do I need to learn to be able to do that. And our young people, as we are all recognising by being here together in Hong Kong, are facing some enormous challenges in the world. And our subject is rich with opportunities to help them discover, create, and drive the resources that will help them swim in their rivers of life. I hope that's given you some things to think about, some orientations. Tomorrow I've got 2 workshops where I can develop those in a far more practical way. But once again, I want to say thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good night. And alcohol can totally be a salutogenic general resistance resource, should you wish.